All right, so I want to really briefly talk about a Star Wars action toy book. And you might be thinking, a toy book, action toy book, is it an action figure? Is it an activity guide? Is it a game book? Is it an actual novel? It's a little bit of all the above, and that's what makes it one of the most unique books, I think, in the entire Legends canon. It's also, from a certain perspective, maybe one of the most frustrating books to own and to properly shelve, store, and display. And that's because it actually has an action figure attached to the book, attached to the spine of the book. This guy doesn't come off. He's attached by a little rope inside the spine. And the idea is that as you're reading the book, there's a little space for him on each page for him to sort of be there and be a part of the action. So you get to read along, you get to follow the story, you get to actually see this little character be in part of the story on each page. Again, it's the thing that makes it frustrating because take a look. If you put this on the bookshelf, Vader's rope and Vader's feet stick out, not to mention, part of his mask and everything else here. So this doesn't fit as neatly as your hardbacks and paperbacks do on the bookshelf. In many cases, you might have to just, stick it on top of some of the others or maybe pull it back a little bit. But that thing that makes it so frustrating, from like I said, from a certain point of view, is the thing that makes it just so darn unique, right? This was published in around '97, I think, in the wake of some of the special edition, theatrical releases. It was published by Funworks. They published one more in this series. This is sort of roughly under the title Darth Vader's Mission. They have another mission series with R2D2. This book in particular about the search for the secret plans, I remember when I first heard about this thinking, oh wow, is there some additional set of secret plans that we get to learn about that Vader went on a hunt for? Well, no. In effect, it's just an adaptation of Episode 4 of his attempt, and really actually an adaptation of the first few minutes of him arriving on Tantive and looking for the stolen plans and finding Leia and interrogating her. And in one of the final pages, you see R2D2 and C3PO take off in the pod. It jumps ahead just a little bit to adapt a few of the scenes, like later on with him on the Death Star, finding people's lack of faith disturbing, whatnot. But on the whole, it's a pretty straightforward adaptation, right out of, scene for scene, right out of A New Hope. And it's largely the case with the R2D2 mission book as well. Again, you get a little R2D2 on the side, but it's largely about him on Tatooine going off looking for someone to pass along the stolen plans to. One thing, though, that I like about this book, I mean, in addition to being incredibly unique, in addition to having, an action figure on the side, is the art is actually, I guess you'd say this is like pretty untraditional Star Wars art. It doesn't have the McQuarrie look, the Drew Struzan look. I mean, there's a really unique thing going on here. I really like the artwork, and I really like the colors. I mean, they just really seem to pop. It's a unique book. I just think that's really cool. I love that blue in the background, and I love the way these figures are drawn. So it's a really neat book all around. Not really easy to find, unfortunately. It's not super valuable by any means. It just happens to be really rare in my experience, at least. So, happy hunting. I mean, do you need this book to know more about the Legends canon? Well, no, not really. I mean, it's a pretty direct adaptation of Episode 4. But again, it's a fun thing to have. It's a really fun collector's piece. I mean, it's such a conversation starter, even among the most hardcore Star Wars fans out there. I mean, how many actual Legends books have action figures attached to them? One thing, though, that I think that I would recommend about this book in terms of the story, even though it is a mostly 100% adaptation of the film, is that in the very final page, you get a tiny little psychological insight into what Vader was thinking, essentially at the end of the movie. And there's just a brief note here from the narrator that says Darth Vader wondered that day, and by that day, it's the day that the droids weren't able to be located on Tatooine, this is right after Darth Vader is realizing that, I think the rebels have gotten away. Now, the Death Star hasn't blown up yet, but he's starting to realize, shoot, I wasn't able to stop them on the Tantive. And the narrator says, Darth Vader wondered that day if the evil Galactic Empire would triumph over the power of the light side of the Force. Now, that's a pretty minor insight, right? But it is neat to know that, at least according to this Legends novel, this Legends, children's novel, part of the action toy book series, it's neat to know that Vader wasn't at this point very hubristic about his chances. I mean, he was genuinely wondering. There's an interesting thing in here too about from the narrator's perspective about Vader's view of the Force. It's interesting. It gets a little bit into the Force and what it is and what Vader learned about it as a child. And again, that's stuff that we know about from what Obi-Wan tells Luke on A New Hope about it being sort of, force field created by all living things. And what we realize here is, again, it's a further insight into what Vader thinks of the Force and what it was he was hoping to do with it. I mean, there's a recognition here that the Force can be used for good or evil, and that Vader decided to use it for evil. And so that insight at the end about whether or not this maybe is the beginning of the end for the Empire is interesting, because you, having learned a little bit more about what Vader thinks about the Force, you realize that in his view, the Force may actually be helping the rebels. So they might not only have the stolen plans, but maybe the light side is got their back as well. So it turns out that for being a pretty straightforward children's book, with kind of a gimmicky, spine action figure here, there's actually one little tiny thing about this that I think actually kind of sets it apart. I think it's I don't know, it's just a fun insight to Vader. So definitely worth checking out. Not essential if you want to know more about the Legends canon, but again, a fun in a really weird way, right? A fun little character study, a fun little insight into Vader himself. Well, I'll come back later and talk a little bit more about the R2-D2 mission book and talk a little bit more about Funworks in general. So these are these guys up here. This isn't your traditional sort of Del Rey or Bantam or Scholastic sort of publisher. They did a few other things, and I'll talk about them in a little bit. They liked these sort of series, right? So this is the action toy book series. There was another series known as the Cruise Along series. And the idea there was, instead of having, say, an action figure or something associated with the book or connected to the book, they did two books. One was called, I think, Luke Skywalker's Race Against Time. The other one is about Han Solo. Again, sort of like adaptations of various things. But the sort of the gimmick there was that they were associated with Galoob, which made micro machines, and so you got some like micro machine like X-wing fighters and Millennium Falcons and things like that. And those are also sort of those are actually a little more easy to find than these action series books. But again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So yeah, Funworks was kind of a neat thing in the late '90s, as was a lot of things for Star Wars and children's books related. I've done other videos on some like episode 1 related children's book stories and stuff, and it was kind of a neat time. There's lots of golden book stories as well from that period that I'll also get into down the road. So yeah, anyway though, Darth Vader's mission, Search for the Secret Plans, basically just an adaptation of A New Hope, but with a little bit of psychological insight into the Dark Lord of the Sith himself with an action figure bonus to boot. So check it out. All right, I'll see you guys next time.